Hello and welcome to Consciously Awesome Living. I'm your host, Sheila Applegate, and we are talking about how to create your most brilliant life by exploring outside the box into things that people may think are far out there. And yet, when we realize how simple and a part of our being they are, we're able to access them. And I'm talking about it like that today because today we're going to talk about how to teleport time and space. And by the time I get done talking to you, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's kind of normal. So let's do that. Now, of course, I am referring to astral projection or out of body experiences. That's how a lot of people in the spiritual type of communities talk about it, or alternative spiritual and healing communities. You may hear of it in that way. But of course, I am a Trekkie at heart, and I've always thought about when on Star Trek, in the earlier days, when they would teleport in well, I'm mostly a Next Generation. That's what I grew up on. But in the earlier days of teleporting, they would show, like, talk about all their molecules going apart and coming back together, and they kind of would show the lights of it. And I always thought about that. And my body hurts when I've traveled across country in an airplane. So I always was like, oh my gosh, that must hurt. And how do they recover from that so quickly? But in reality, that is more like what we're doing when we're astral projecting or having an out of body experience. And most of us do it every night during our dreams. So it's actually not very difficult, nor is it hard on the body. It's actually quite gentle when we understand it. And of course, there's all different levels of this experience. If you are one that wants to it's still in the, I'm not sure about this mode, and you want to look into maybe some of the scientific experiments around it, I would highly recommend checking out the IONS website and some of the studies that they've done, because they do all kinds of different studies about energy and movement. And I know that there's some things that fit right into this. But today we're just going to assume that we're all going to take this journey. And my most favorite portal for any of this, our transportation portal, is imagination and meditation. And that often seems simple to people, but it's something we do every day. And if you think about when your mind is wandering, you're wandering into the past and you're thinking about things that happened, you can feel a full sense of nostalgia. And sometimes, if you're worrying or anticipating something that's going to happen, you may move all the way into the future as you imagine that. And then later, you may even have deja vu, maybe from a dream of doing that or from experiencing something like that in your mind and imagination. So, we all have little glimpses of how this may be a part of our normal experience. And then we have some of the more extreme examples of it that people talk about. I'm going to try to weave right in between those two and show you a little bit about some of the experience I've personally had. I never went and trained under someone to teleport or astral plane. So I don't even know how they are actually teaching people, but I'm going to teach you how I learned it, because I learned it as a small child. And I think that, to me, that's our natural state before we forget, before we are told that it doesn't work. We were just doing it. And I'll talk to you about that in a little while. But I do want to give you some examples. And one of the first ones I want to tell you, an experience that included a couple of my friends. And I like this experience because it placed me in a position where having the experience completely affirmed or confirmed for me. And I was not one of the people that was directly involved in it. So one day, many years ago, now I say that a lot now. I feel like I'm getting old. Everything's many years ago. um, 2 houses ago, let's go with that. Anyway, back in the day, one time I got a phone call from a friend, and she said to me, "What do you do when somebody shows up at your house?" And I was like, "Well, that's a broad question. What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, when they show up uninvited, but they don't really do anything, and they're not in the physical." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I went right to another friend, and in my head, I thought I got an image of that friend being there, but she hadn't said that. So I said, "Well, can you tell me about it? Because it would be different under different situations if I was comfortable with a person. There's, I would, it would be, I would address it differently depending on what happened." So she goes on to tell me a story about the friend of mine Tom, who is the friend who had shown up at her house. It was the one I was thinking of. And she said, "Well, he just we could feel his presence, but really she wasn't the first to notice it." She said the dog started barking. Her dog started barking, and they were barking at pictures that were on the wall. And the energy shifted in the room, and one of the people in her home who was very sensitive started to react to the energy change and felt a presence, and I feel was a little uncomfortable because that person wasn't sure of the energies just in general. We all have our fears of it. And so some chaos happened in the evening, but the energy of Tom hadn't done anything. It was just the reaction of the dogs and the people in the house. And so she said, "I don't think he meant to, but he wasn't," or, well, she said, "I don't think he meant any harm, but he wasn't invited." So I said, "Well, I'll talk to him," because I knew both of them better than they knew each other. And so I saw Tom, and not saying anything else to him, I said, um, "Sandy contacted me, and um, he immediately," all I said was that. And he immediately, his eyes bugged out. He says, "I didn't mean to. I was just thinking about them and how nice they are and how kind they are. And I was thinking of their dogs and the pictures on the wall." And I am not making this up. He mentioned the exact same things that she mentioned. And he said, "It just happened." Now, I never told him what had happened, what she had told me, or anything. He knew instantly what the conversation was about. And it was just, he had just experienced it. He was young too at the time, and he had just experienced that, being in that space. And he knew it was so real that when I mentioned her, that he knew that that's what I was going to talk about. And everything was fine and it worked out, perfectly. But for me, and they may not even remember that moment, but for me, it was such confirmation of people on both sides experiencing it. And it was something that I didn't have to question in myself. It wasn't my experience being analyzed by myself, right? It was outside of me. And I got to witness two sides reacting to that. And then, of course, once they understood, it was very calm and comfortable, um, and they both understood each other. I think they ended up talking about that. So I just wanted to share that experience, because sometimes there's a few things in it, right? When we're afraid of things, sometimes we feel things in our house and we don't know how to interpret it. Both of those people had a foundation in a culture that understood that. But for some of us, we have a lot of fears that we put on different things that are unknown to us, and a lot of stories that are told to us that we should be protecting ourselves. If you are in love, we talked about that before, you're pouring love through you, you are protected. You're pouring love through your home, you are protected from these things. And it isn't that your people are harming each other. This is about a natural, just the love. If you look at that in that story, it was his love, his compassion, his feeling of appreciation that made him move into that space. So, a couple other times that this has been very notable to me was one time I was in England, and my English mom was driving me to the to visit the castle she had grown up in, which is pretty cool in itself, right? Her father had been a butler when she was younger, and so she grew up in this castle in the countryside. And as we were driving there, we passed Stonehenge, and we weren't going to Stonehenge, we just passed it. And as we came up upon it, I felt myself leave my body in a sense and be in there. The energy of Stonehenge was so beautiful. And I just had this moment as we were driving by where I got to be right in the center of it, see it from that perspective, feel it, and experience the beauty of that energy. And while still being aware that I was in the car, or it happens above time, I guess. And so it felt like I was there longer, but I didn't, you know, pass out or anything in the car. It was just this natural experience. On the way back, we stopped at Stonehenge. And since the time I had been there when I was a teenager, they had put up all this fencing and to protect it. And so we couldn't even get close to it. And the contrast of being there physically, but separated from the fence, compared to the experience of being there in spirit that I had from that out of body experience when we drove by was so stark of a contrast that the experience of being there physically was not energetically pleasant. It was like I felt separate. I felt much further away than when I had just allowed myself to move into that space. And perhaps the most profound example of this was of me teleporting recently, or astral projecting out of body experience, was in 2020 when my mom was dying from COVID and I couldn't be with her in the physical world. I kept feeling her come and take me to places like almost like a mom would hold your hand and pull you in. And most of the time during those days, I was in meditation and just honoring the grief. But some one day I wanted to go to the store, and so I got myself all ready to go to the store, and I walked out the door, and all of a sudden I got whoosh, I felt my mom's energy. I had to come back in and sit down, and in that experience, it was like she took my hand and she took me to every place that she had lived in her life. I saw her childhood home, which of course I had been in with my grandparents when I was younger, but I saw it from the way it looked when she was a child, and I saw my grandfather at his workbench and her sitting with him, and I got to see her college dorm and her first apartment, her first home, the home where I was when I was born, but don't remember, all the way up to my childhood home, and experience her vision of it, as well as like her showing me through this tour of her life, which was incredible. It's such an incredible experience and natural. Um, and that's why I want to share with you all how I learned to do this, and you can play with that and see how that experience works for you. And how when we get back from the break, I'm going to talk to you about how I came to this as a child and give you ideas to play with, because playing with it and just not worrying about the truth of it, just experiencing it, will be the path to it. And also, it'll be the confirmation that you're looking for. So you start by doing, and then you get the confirmation. So we'll be back in just a second and we'll explore that.
Soulivity Magazine and Beyond Words Publishing want to remind you about the importance of continuing to follow public health guidelines to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your community. Please continue to wear a mask, wash your hands, and watch your distance. Please visit these sites for further information about how to stay safe from COVID-19 into the new year. Remember, love protects us.
All right. We are talking about teleporting, aka astral projection or out of body experiences. And let's just first address the fears that people may have real quickly. I think there's stories that you could leave your body and not get back into it. And there's also some people may have had an experience of that um, without trying, right? And then might get a feeling of being out of control. So I think that out of control is our biggest fear. Now, I think that you may enjoy just playing with this the way I did and not think about it in these big terms, big words. And I think also why I like that teleport, because you can use your imagination. Now, I told you that I started doing this when I was a little kid, and I know I like this story, so you may have heard it in some of the various places that you listen to me. But when one of my first memories of this being anything to note as unusual was when I was sharing a room with my sister as a young child and said to her, you know, when you leave your body and you fly around the room? And she said, no. And that was my first realization that people didn't do that, you know? But the thing is with that story is I never go on to why I told her that, why I wanted, because it was just, I wasn't asking about it. I was just going to tell her a story about that was one of the times that I had gone further than I had ever gone before, because I never was trying to leave my body. Like that wasn't what I was, why or how I got there. So what I would do as a little child, and this is something that you can do and give it a try, is I just used to close my eyes and I would rock, and I'm closing my eyes so you can see. I think that my body was rocking a little bit, but also my eyes in my were going back and forth. And because I was reliving the feeling of maybe being on a hammock, probably of being on a boat, because I grew up on the water and I loved to be on boats and used to sleep out in them when we were little sometimes. So, but it just that rocking, like if you can imagine being on a swing, I did it going to side, and I would just feel it more and more until it actually felt like I was experiencing that for whatever visual you might use, swing, boat, hammock. And then I would bring my attention a little above because it would make the feeling more intense. So I would move my attention from my physical body to just a little above my body because it felt good. That's the only reason I was doing it, because it felt good to me. I liked the feeling. It was soothing, it was calming, and it felt good. And then, because I always like a challenge, then once I realized I was doing it, not really thinking anything of the stories people say, I moved a little further. And then I would try to see how far I could get up and how long I could stay just above my body rocking. And then that day that I asked my sister was one of the days where it would, once in a while, I could feel like I was moving through the whole room. And that day, I even had left the room and got to be outside in the yard in that feeling. So the beautiful thing about this was it was just a little girl playing with her imagination because it felt good. And there were no stories. There was no discussion yet in the house of, oh, be careful, you could lose yourself, or that's not safe. I was not instructed or dogmented on any of that. I was just doing that. So my suggestion is to just allow yourself to experience it for the fun of experiencing it and see how that moves you as a little girl, imagining, or a little boy, or whatever gender you identify with. You could just imagine yourself young and experiencing that for the fun of it, and try to just let all the stories about it dissolve away from you if you've heard them, even mine, I guess. The other thing that I did next, because, I was having fun with this. So the other thing I remember in my childhood, late, a little older than those days, was that I used to imagine I was walking on the ceiling of my house. And now, in order to do that, you have to change your perspective. You have to imagine what the rooms would look like if it was flipped upside down. There was one part that I don't know why, but we had like in a corner of one of our ceilings, there was like a, maybe there was pipes there or something, but it was, there's a decline. And so the ceiling became lower in a small section of it. And I would imagine sitting on that. Like that was my bench because there was no furniture. And if you would go through a door, I would have to walk over the door. And I would imagine all of how I could make that space usable and livable. And I would just spend times looking up at the ceiling, first just looking at the room that I was in and the ceiling. And then from that space, I would go and walk through the other rooms and see what I would find and experience. And then afterwards, I would walk through the rooms in the physical and see if it looked the way it was looking in my imagination, in my head, to the point where it really felt that way. All of these things are about helping to change your perspective and to stretch your mind to see things from different angles, and to, from that space, you can do other things. And it's easy and it's comfortable. I think that's how it does it. It's how I got through my mom's crossing without being able to be with her, and how that now becomes a very special memory for me. It's how I get to go places that I can't go in the physical world. It's how I can feel close to my children, even though they live on the opposite coast of the country from me. So when you think about this as just something that is pleasant, that is supportive of you, and it doesn't have to have any scientific meaning, it doesn't have to have any anything other than pleasure for you, then you can play with that. And once that becomes natural, you can teleport yourself anywhere, right? You can look from the sun, down. I also love to imagine that I was on the top of a tree, right? And looking, and because there's a couple things with this. It's fun, it changes and it expands your mind, but also it is allowing you to change your perspective on how you view the world, how you view situations that you're navigating in your life. And that is the benefit of it. And so when my my idea is always, let's not try to see if this is real or try to prove it. Although if your mind goes that way, by all means, go listen to the data or the information of people who have studied this, because that's cool too. But when we just move beyond it and say, how can this apply to my health? My health? Oh, that's good. I didn't mean to say that, but now I want to explore how this helps my health, because I bet you it does. And how can it help my life, right? How can it make my life better and my experience in human existence better? So we're just going to take a real quick minute. It's not even a meditation. I'm just going to kind of give you a moment to get you started, okay? So just close your eyes, and if you can, lay down. And with your eyes closed, laying down, just imagine yourself on a hammock or on a raft on the water. Just imagine going back and forth, back and forth. Bring all your attention to that space. Feel the tummy moving with it. It gives that kind of jump that we get in our tummy when we are moving back and forth, back and forth. And then just imagine you're going a little higher, just above it, swinging back and forth. It feels so peaceful and gentle. Focus on the feeling of it. Focus on what it feels like to move. And then move a little of your attention a little bit further away from your body. Now it really feels like you're just floating in air, moving back and forth. And just stay with that. And then bring your attention back and open your eyes, still feeling peaceful. It's really that simple. And it'll be even easier without my words now that you've experienced that, just to do that over and over. And then when that's natural and you feel like it, you can just think of a place you'd like to be and imagine it. Lately, I have been going back to my home, and I've been going in every room and every drawer. The other day, I was opening cupboards and remembering what dishes were in each cupboard, whether I remembering them or not. And I thought about it. I'm looking at it in the past. That's where time and space is both intersecting, right? Because I know now that it's a home for people who need extra services. And so it looks very different. And I can go in and I can imagine it and see it and feel it as it is now, but I can also go back to my childhood and be right back in that time, in that space. This, my friends, is a joy, and it's playful and it's fun. And I want you to give it a try and then tell me what you're experiencing. And if you have had out of body experiences that are joyful or fun, and or even any that have frightened you a little bit, go ahead and write in the comments or send me an email at my website, SheilaApplegate.com. Tell me about the experience. I would love to know about it, and I can always follow back up with another show where we dive deeper into this, or maybe even a class. So let me know what your experiences are. Have an amazing week, and we will be back again next week.